Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Michael Schroeder. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast today. If you haven't checked out our previous episodes from last week, please check those out as well. Some really good content provided by the other hosts of this podcast, so please check that out as well. We got a really great action-packed show for you guys. I'm talking about the Hall of Fame, basically who made the Hall of Fame, and you guys probably heard about this before anyway, but I'm talking about the impact of the speeches within the Hall of Fame as well within that section. I'm going to talk about the fact that how the play-in for the Eastern and Western Conference is set, what I think is going to happen with that, and what I think this ultimately means for the top seeds of each conference based on the teams that are in this play-in and the danger they pose to knocking off a top seed. Then we're going to talk about the New York Knicks, who clinched the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons as they head into their first-round playoff series next week against the Atlanta Hawks. And the last thing I'm going to do is talk about the evolution of the power forward position, because I think the power forward position has become a little bit weaker in terms of just like the amount of guys and battles that are in each conference. While I think they're the ones who are really good players, I'm going to talk about how that's drastically changed and how like the idea of being a power forward is very different than it was probably even back in the early 2000s to 2012 range. With that being said, we're going to start out with the Hall of Fame. And the Hall of Fame, definitely, obviously an incredible event. So glad it got to be able to be shared with all the viewers and everyone. And look, I mean, obviously, when you're inducted in the Hall of Fame as an NBA player, it's from what they described it as, it's an incredible achievement. Because think about it, right? All your accolades, all the things you put, the heart, the sweat, the tears, the extra hours you put in, right? The leadership or the championships you've won or anything like that gets recognized on a national stage, and also the fact that you're also going to be cemented as one of the greater players to ever play the game for a long time to come. And what's cool about that is that basically you look at the certain guys who got into this class, right? The 2020 class was pretty remarkable. And you look at guys like Kevin Garnett and Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan as the headlines, but I'm going to break down each one of them, each member of the class specifically, because they all really should have been showcased like they were, and they really, I think, made people recognize the greatness that everyone on that stage shared. And it all revolved around discipline, hard work, the greater support system, and believing in their own vision. Right? Player or coach, that's going to how it be. But we're going to talk about just like breaking down who each person that made the Hall of Fame, their some quick tidbits of their credentials a little bit, and then I'm going to give you the impact of their speeches. So let's start off with that to begin with. So Kevin Garnett was the first person that was in the Hall of Fame, the class first person to speak, and just some things to run off the bat. So Kevin Garnett, everyone remembers him for his passion, his intensity, his trash talking, right? Just the way he played the game. He was Defensive Player of the Year and an MVP, and he was a 15-time All-Star. He was a 12-time All-Defensive team member. He was a 2008 champion, MVP, and Defensive Player of the Year. During his prime, he was one of the best power forwards to play in the game, and also one of the best defensive power forwards to play in the game, and definitely one of the more intense players we'll ever see on the court. And if you look at, averaged 17.8 points a game and 10 rebounds for his career. Now, those numbers did drop off based on his stint a little bit with Brooklyn and Minnesota. But when he was with his second time in Minnesota, his first go-around with Minnesota, he was unbelievable, averaging near 22 points a game most years. And then even in Boston, he was like a 19 to 20 point a game scorer a lot of times too. So, he was truly an exceptional player, and definitely a guy that lived by his emotions and his intensity. And like a lot of people say, control your emotions in big moments. He was a guy that was able to use his emotion level to really get the upper hand on a lot of teams he went against. So from that angle, pretty remarkable how he's been able to get to this point. And he's just one of the better power forwards to ever play in the game. One of the better defensive power forwards to play in the game. And I mean, look, when you're making defensive team 12 times, that's pretty remarkable. It's very hard to be a consistently great defender all the time and also dominating the offensive end. And look, everyone's going to probably say, well, he went and joined a big three, that's why he won the championship. Okay, but he did lead to that Minnesota team to the Western Conference Finals, and people can't argue this guy was one of the greatest power forwards of all time. There's not many guys, at least in that era, I would take over him. It would probably be like Duncan, Dirk, were probably the only two guys I would probably take over him. But it's very close. I mean, he was an incredible defender. He had incredible intensity, a passion about him, and we'll talk more about his speech later. But I think the fact is that people got to see in his career the intensity, that passion, that sometimes not even having the best control of your emotions doesn't always, do wrong for your team, as long as you're able to channel that to winning play, right? And he was able to do that at a really high level. And, what he did for Minnesota, what he did for Boston, and just bringing a toughness, right? He's a guy that LeBron James had to always overcome and try to beat in his journey, right? And at least when he was with Boston. And, that's not easy to do. It's not easy to do, and it shows you just what the fact that, being a Hall of Famer at the power forward position, especially during the time when power forwards were big time. I mean, I'm going to talk about them later, but the power forward position, less so than it is now. I mean, back when he played, was one of the best premier positions in the entire association, and it wasn't even a conversation. It was one of the best positions in the entire NBA, and it was because those guys could do multiple stuff. I mean, think about it. Kevin Garnett had guard-like skills. He could shoot the ball from 15 to 18 feet, even could hit a three if he had to, but he was an incredible 15 to 18-foot jump shooter. He could take bigs off the dribble. He had a post game. He was really physical. Obviously deserving to be in the Hall of Fame, right? Second person on the list is Rudy Tomjanovich, and people remember him because he was a really good NBA player, where he was a 5-time NBA All-Star and averaged 17.4 points and 8.1 rebounds. Unfortunately, also had that gruesome injury where he got punched in the face and ended his career in a sense from playing. But he had a really good NBA career as a player. I mean, when you make the All-Star team 5 times, it's pretty exceptional, right? A guy who's getting inducted into the NBA Hall of Fame next year, Chris Webber, was a 5-time NBA All-Star. So, I mean, it's very hard to do that and be consistent all the time. So, from that angle, that's kind of where we go with that. And it's interesting, right? Now, as a coach, he was 503 and 397 as a coach in the NBA. He was 51 and 39 in the playoffs. He was a 1994 and 95 champion. He coached guys like Hakeem Olajuwon, Robert Horry, Kenny Smith. And, the list goes on, obviously, right? That Houston team was a pretty dang exceptional team. And what's really cool, too, is just the fact of that a player and a coach can, both find success in two different kind of walks of life, right? So what I mean by that is that, he was a successful NBA player, but unfortunately that injury he had kind of ended his career, right? And that would have been really tough for him to get involved back in basketball again, but it showed you his level of determination and passion and he wanted to be back in that spotlight again as a coach. And when you have a .559 winning percentage, when you also have a 51-39 playoff record, which is better than a lot of other good coaches that we'll see in the Hall of Fame someday too, and you won 2 championships, I mean, again, you have to be recognized for that. And I think that's just truly remarkable. And his speech was remarkable too. We'll talk about that later as I get into the segment. But again, what he did for the NBA community as a coach in terms of getting a team that was not Michael Jordan to be a powerhouse and allowing Hakeem Olajuwon to really showcase his skill sets to the best ability, to being a supporter, to being a guy who at least gets the NBA because he played in it. But what's interesting though is how being a player and then coaching, you see this with Steve Kerr, right? You see this with Monty Williams. You see this with Mark Jackson. They find success because not all of them, right? Kevin McHale found success as a head coach a good amount of times too. But the reason why you can find success is primarily because of understanding how the players are, understanding what they go through, everything like that, right? So it's pretty remarkable that he was, it's great to see that he was enshrined in the Hall of Fame, obviously. The third person on the list is Kim Mulkey. I've talked about Kim Mulkey a whole ton on the show, and it's because she has provided women's basketball with another platform and coach that can really show that her style works, right? And just to run down some credentials for her, she was a national champion at Louisiana Tech as a player and assistant coach. She was a 3-time national champion head coach at Baylor. So she's the only person in women's history that ever win a national championship as a player, coach, and assistant coach. Pretty remarkable. She has over 650 wins when she won at Baylor. And the cool thing, too, is that she credits her players for her success as much as just her system. And the fact is, she hasn't had a lot of turnover in her staff, which that speaks a lot, right? She's a current head coach at LSU. And I've talked about her, right? I mean, she knows how to get the best out of her players. I mean, you look at the fact of Brittany Griner, right? You look at other players from Baylor that have made the WNBA, right? And the fact is that she has understood that she has to be tough, has to be supportive, and has to get the most out of these players, but also understanding the fact that the players make up a lot of what she can do, right? If she has got good talent and she does well in recruiting, that also puts her a leg up on the other coaches as well and allows her to be successful every year because you're always getting the top players that she can mold into her playing style. I mean, think about it. She didn't change the way she coached. She didn't change the way she wanted to do things. And that's something for a lot of people to look at, right? A lot of times being successful is, yes, understanding maybe the new offensive and defensive trends in basketball, but not changing the way you coach in terms of motivation, in terms of getting people to understand what you need for them on a night-to-night basis. And that's important, right? Because as a coach, especially when you're competing against teams like UConn, Stanford, Tennessee, now Arizona, obviously, it's not easy. It's not easy because, and another team I forgot to mention too, South Carolina, obviously, right? When you're competing with these high-level teams, you have to be able to keep your style relevant, right? And she said the players have to be in her mind, right, and everything like that, right? So you look at her, and coming from a really small town in Louisiana, so going to LSU made a lot of sense. Obviously, I talked about that on a previous show I did. But the thing is, when I look at this, it makes me marvel at how these coaches can get the most out of these players. It's not easy, obviously, right? It's not easy because you're getting these top recruited players who have been dominating their entire lives and everything like that, and it doesn't matter to them. The coaches figure it out, figure out the best way to get the most out of these players. So that's truly remarkable. Fourth person, best power forward of all time, in my opinion, Tim Duncan got enshrined. 19-year NBA career with one team. Right? He's a 5-time champion with the Spurs. 15-time All-Star / All-NBA. 15-time All-Defensive. 2-time MVP. 3 times Finals MVP. I mean, this guy was unbelievable. Obviously, if people look at just look at his footwork, you look at the fact that he was also just incredible in the playoffs. A guy who also was just a guy who led by example, man of few words, right? A guy who, had an incredible skill set. And people doubted him out of college. People didn't think he was going to be this incredible player that he turned out to be, but he was. And he was, in his prime, he was truly unstoppable. There was nothing you could do because he was so skilled down in the post. And also, he was quick enough where he could at least, if you play out on him, he could take a dribble by you and lay it in. But he was great defensively. He was a guy that the constant guys looked to for leadership and mentorship. And, the accolades speak for themselves. And he's, in my opinion, the best power forward to ever play the game. And I think he's recognizes that too. But the thing is, you look at just recognizing greatness is just the important thing too, right? You're recognizing things that these guys have done. And it's just cool to see that Tim Duncan was getting recognized too. And then see kind of the level of discipline and effort that he put in, and being a guy from the Virgin Islands to come and work out and get a chance at Wake Forest, and Greg Popovich taking a chance on him. It was really cool. Now, Kobe Bryant, his speech was done by Vanessa Bryant, his wife, because if you guys obviously forgot, Kobe Bryant unfortunately had a really tragic helicopter crash that made him and his 13-year-old daughter, Gigi, lose their lives, which was one of the more sadder days, I think, in my life, at least in just from like a sports angle. It's just obviously still sad to this day that we're not going to hear those great stories from Kobe, have his influence on young players, not have him at least give his Hall of Fame speech last night. With that being said, though, we're going to remember the greatness of Kobe Bryant, right? Vanessa's speech, by the way, which I'll get into, wonderful, wonderful speech, and you can really see the passion that Kobe had and the influence he had on that family, truly, truly remarkable. But you think about it, right? Kobe Bryant was an 18-time All-Star. He was an MVP. He had won 5 championships. He was 12 times All-Defensive, right? He was 15-time All-NBA. And he's the 4th leading scorer in NBA history. He's a guy that dominated doing it his way. He had the same killer mentality. He's basically a subversion of Jordan, right? And I mean that with like the greatest compliments. I'm saying his game was so similar. He did basically everything as similarly as he could to Jordan. And he was an incredible player, obviously, right? And he inspired a lot of people to work hard because of his work ethic, and as he got older and wiser, he just became an incredible businessman. I mean, he's the first athlete to ever win an Oscar. Think about that, right? The work he did off the court with storytelling and helping others. And I mean, look at like Sabrina Ionescu, right? One of the best players in women's basketball at the moment in WNBA. He helped train her a lot of times too. I mean, they had a great relationship. So that's an important thing to understand there too, guys, is that Kobe, people are going to, think about the tragic death, but you have to remember whether or not you may have, rooted for him or against him, you have to remember his greatness as a player. I mean, he was unreal. Tim Duncan was the same way, but I didn't see as much of Tim Duncan's prime because I was only about 6 or 7 at the time when he was really in his prime. But I saw Kobe Bryant's prime a little bit, and man, that guy was good. And he really inspired a lot of people. And he really did, the best he could. And the fact is, he did stuff off the court that really should inspire athletes to do the same. Get into stuff that you want to do, that you're passionate about, right? And that's what he did. I mean, he was passionate about basketball, so he dedicated all his time to doing that. And then he also dedicated a lot of his time, frankly, to ensuring the success of his kids. He was there for his kids, right? But I think the fact that he also was passionate about stuff to do off the court, right? Storytelling, making movies, script writing, doing different things. And that's what's really cool about him, right? What's really cool about this whole situation is what Kobe was able to inspire people to do. I think at the end of the day. Now a lot more people are inspired by him and want to be like his work ethic and be like him. It's pretty cool. So the impact of speeches, I'll be really quick on this as I'm, getting close to running out of time. But the big points I'm going to make for you guys is that the speeches were moving, right? It was moving because you got to see the different stories, the different people they thanked. You got to see and appreciate the greatness of these players and coaches. And it's moving because it inspired, for especially as an athlete or someone that is working to become good at something, whatever it is. It shows you that, or inspires people to pursue their dreams and to not give up, right? And I think it also shows the greatness of this class, right? You look at guys like Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, Kobe Bryant to highlight the class. But you also look at Rudy Tomjanovich, good NBA coach with the Rockets, good player. Then you look at Kim Mulkey, right? One of the best women's basketball coaches in history. Getting to hear their stories and the people they thanked and the people that inspired them. It just shows how great these people came and also like how they got there, right? Work ethic, diligence, and believing in themselves. Like I said, it makes you remember the greats like Kobe, right? The speech by Vanessa was unbelievable. Really just showed exactly what Kobe was about. And then you look at guys like Tim Duncan, right? You just got to see how he became so great. Kevin Garnett, same thing. Rudy Tomjanovich and Kim Mulkey. You got to see and remember not just the players that they were or coaches they were, but the players they were surrounded with, the support system, the people that really got them to be who they were going to be. It's truly remarkable about how they really get to this point, and it's really cool. And then the last thing I want to just highlight with to end it off is just passion, right? You saw the passion in their speeches, which encapsulates who these people were. They had passion about the game. They had passion about their skill set, passion about winning. And that really, at the end of the day, gets everything to where it needs to go. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, we're going to break down the play-in tournament and how it's set, and then my predictions about the whole situation. All that coming back up when we return on the next segment. See you guys soon.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Michael Schroeder, your host for this podcast today. If you didn't check out my previous segment where I talked about the Hall of Fame class of 2020 and the speeches they gave and the accolades that these people accomplished that got into the Hall of Fame, please check that out. You're going to really want to check and listen to that because it's important to appreciate greatness and to understand how moving those speeches really were. Now, in terms of movement, well, the play-in situation is now finally set in both conferences. And I'm going to say, frankly, when it starts tomorrow, it's going to be really interesting to see how this stuff, unfolds. I'm recording this on Monday, by the way. So what's really interesting is that how you look at the play-in, right? I've went through this before. I didn't think it was a good idea at first, but it's going to be exciting basketball now, right? Definitely, I understand what the NBA was trying to achieve during this whole process, more so now. And, we'll see what happens. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this all unfolds. And from the East side, Boston's going to be the 7th seed. Boston didn't play any of their really good guys yesterday against the Knicks, lost that game. Now they're the 7th seed. They play Washington on Tuesday, who just got the 8th seed with a win against Charlotte, which I predicted would happen. The Pacers are 9th, and the Hornets are 10th. And the Pacers and Hornets also play tomorrow. And Wednesday will feature the Western Conference play-in, which the Lakers are the 7th seed because the Blazers beat the Denver Nuggets. The Warriors are the 8th seed with a win against the Memphis Grizzlies yesterday. Memphis is the 9th seed, and the Spurs are the 10th seed. So, again, that's a pretty interesting shakeup in the sense of how all this stuff unfolded, obviously, right? It's really cool to see everything kind of, fall into place in a sense. It's going to be really interesting seeing LeBron James and Anthony Davis against Steph Curry on Wednesday, and Russell Westbrook against Kemba Walker and Jason Tatum with Bradley Beal. I think that will be a really fun matchup to watch too. And it will bring good basketball. Even though I like I said, I'm not as big a fan of the play-in as others may have been. The matchups are going to be kind of exciting, actually. And I'm going to get into my predictions in just a minute, but I want to just say the fact that you look at some of these teams that have been playing really good basketball, right? The Lakers have started to get rolling at the right time. They got LeBron James back the last 2 games. They've won 5 straight, something like that. And they just won the last 2 with LeBron, and they looked good. I mean, LeBron looked really good. Anthony Davis looks okay. I mean, he had some really good games up until yesterday against the Pelicans. But the Warriors have been looking really good because Steph Curry had 46 points the other night against the Grizzlies. But from my angle, look, the play-in is going to be very interesting in the Western Conference because I think those bottom-end seeds have a better chance at making things interesting for a top seed, in my opinion. But with that being said, let's get into a little bit about how these teams have been playing of late and what they're going to be going forward. So the Wizards are going to be the 7th. I think the Wizards are the 8th seed at the moment, right? And the reason why I thought they were going to get there is because they had an easy schedule at the end, and they're playing really good basketball, right? They're 4-2 in their last 6 games to end the year. Boston, on the other hand, has lost 5 of 6. Their only win coming against the Timberwolves, and they look really out of sync. I mean, like I talked about on a recent show I did for this podcast, Jaylen Brown's out with a wrist injury for the year. He tore a ligament in his wrist, and he had to get surgery, and they just haven't looked very good. They're not playing good defense. They're not in sync. Actually, yesterday against the Knicks was the most motivated Boston Celtics performance I think I've seen all year from start to finish. That team did not have any other good players, and they kept the game close against the Knicks. And they actually showed some fight and some heart, which is something they have not shown at all for much of the year. Now, the Pacers have played decent basketball lately. They just got Sabonis back, which I think will make them a really tough out for whoever they play. And look, I mean, it's going to be interesting, right? I wouldn't be surprised if the Celtics don't even make the playoffs, to be honest with you. I wouldn't be shocked about that. I wouldn't be shocked if the Wizards don't either, and the Pacers get the spot. I wouldn't be shocked because I think that 7 through 10, Charlotte's been playing really bad basketball recently. Charlotte was, I think, on the right track, but through injuries and inconsistent play, they just haven't been very good recently. And I just think that they're in a deep hole here. I don't think they're going to get far. But to get into my predictions a little bit, because I think people want to hear this, I think the Wizards are going to be the 7th seed. I think they're going to beat Boston. And the reason why I think that is because they've been playing better basketball. And I think their 2 stars are more explosive in terms of scoring numbers than I think that the 2 guys in the Boston Celtics. And what I mean by that is I'm looking at Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, who've both been playing exceptional basketball of late, versus Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker, who've both been playing good basketball. But right at this point, I'd probably take Westbrook over Kemba Walker in that matchup. And because Russell Westbrook might not shoot a good percentage, which a lot of times he will not, but he'll get you a triple-double, and he'll put all his effort into it, which I don't think the Celtics always do. And Bradley Beal's a guy that can score. He's averaging 31.4 points a game this year. And I think that he's going to he's going to do that he's going to score around 30 points against the Boston Celtics. And I'm looking at the fact that the Wizards play at one of the fastest paces in the league, that Boston doesn't really have any sort of semblance of a defense. You know, they can say, oh, you played good defense against the Knicks yesterday. Well, the Knicks are not a very good offensive team. Right? And I'm going to get to the Knicks later, but the Knicks are not a good offensive team. That's just obvious. They're just not very good. If anyone's watched any Knicks games closely, as I have, they're not a good offensive team. They're great defensively. They're great in terms of being together, but they're not a good offensive team at all. Right? Boston is not very good in terms of anything. I think right now they are 16th in defensive efficiency and 12th in offensive efficiency. But what's going to be more interesting about that is the fact that, look, the Wizards are not good defensively at all. But the Wizards are one of the best offensive teams in the recent stretch. And they're also playing really good basketball. So the problem is it's going to be really hard to beat them because they play really fast. They play, downhill on you. And Bradley Beal, Russell Westbrook can really put up a lot of points. And they play at a really fast pace, which you have to be able to keep up with. This is going to be a big test on these Celtics guys. Are they going to be able to be tough and get it done? And I don't think they're going to beat the Wizards. And I think the Wizards are going to play Brooklyn in the first round, which I think they'll get swept or lose in 5 games in that series. I think Boston would definitely get swept. I think the Wizards probably get swept as well. And it would just be, I think it's going to be a more entertaining series. And I think the reason why I have the Wizards in the 7th seed is just more the fact that they've been playing better basketball and they're incredibly dangerous in the offensive end because they have 2 of the better players in basketball, right? Russell Westbrook, you could say top 15 to 20 player in the league probably. I'd probably say top 20 to 25. He's still, I'd probably say he's top 20. He's definitely top 20. He could arguably say top 15, but he's definitely top 20. And Bradley Beal's in that same conversation, top 20, top 15. 2 of the better guards in the league, right? So, and the thing is, I look at, Kemba Walker has played really well of late, but he has, and that's of late. He's been riddled by injuries, and he just hasn't quite looked the same consistently. And the problem is, you saw with Boston yesterday, Boston actually ran a really good offense with Brad Stevens because Brad Stevens actually got the players to buy in. With Jason Tatum, he's not a passer. He shoots way too much. And I think that's going to hurt him. Look, the fact that they lost to the Cavs the way they did, I think I like the Wizards in this game. I really do. I like the Wizards winning this game. I think it'll be a close game, but I think the Wizards are going to win this game, get the 7th seed, and play Brooklyn in the first round. So that leaves the 9-10 matchup. So who's going to play Boston? Okay, well, I think the Indiana Pacers will play them. The reason why is because Charlotte has lost their last 3 games. Charlotte has not looked very good. And the issue is, look, Charlotte misses Gordon Hayward. I'll be the first one to say it. They Gordon Hayward was having an all-star level year, and he has not been there consistently in the second half of the year, and they've really, missed his influence, I think, in a big time, because I think what Gordon Hayward provides is another scorer, another guy who can create his own shot, a guy who can space the floor for you, and that's what's going to, help the Hornets if he was there. But the Pacers have Domantas Sabonis back healthy, and he played really well in their game yesterday, and I think that's what's going to make them a tough out. The reason I think that is because Sabonis is a guy in the power forward position or center position, whatever you really want to classify him as. I say more of a power forward. But he's a guy that can hit the 3. He's a guy that can take you in the post and face you up and score very easily. He's an incredible passer. He's really good on the glass. And then you also have guys like Malcolm Brogdon. You have guys like Karis LeVert, who's been playing incredible basketball recently. Right? And I think Indiana is going to be a very, very dangerous team. I said this before. When they all got it clicking, look, Nate Bjorken has not done a great job in terms of getting his team to play buy-in defense. They played really poor defense this year, which is something Nate McMillan had his team doing at a high level last year. Outside of Miles Turner, who should be in the running for Defensive Player of the Year because of what he's doing in terms of being a shot blocker, their team has not played very good defense as a whole. So Charlotte could probably score points on them, but I think Charlotte's too young. I think that they're not as talented. I'm taking Indiana in that matchup. So, with that being said, who do I see being the 8th seed? Well, and this may be, outlandish, but I originally was saying, maybe Boston will get it. But then the way Indiana's been playing, I think Boston's going to get kicked out of the playoffs. I really, really think this. The reason why is because I think Boston's they have not been playing good basketball. They have no answer for Sabonis, and I think with Indiana was close with them early in the year, and they didn't have Karis LeVert. I think LeVert is the ultimate matchup problem. I think with Malcolm Brogdon, Miles Turner can stretch the floor. It's going to be a close game. I mean, it's a close call, but I'm saying, Boston should get the 8th seed, but I don't more see anything that Boston will not. I think Boston, there's a definite chance that they get kicked out of the entire playoffs. Because I look at teams that are playing better basketball recently, and Boston there's something wrong there. Even if they make the playoffs, they're going to get swept in the first round. I mean, there's something wrong there, and there's something they're missing, from my opinion. And that's where I kind of go with that. So, overall, I think the Wizards will be the 7th seed. I think the Pacers have a great chance to get the 8th seed. I'm going to give that like a 55% chance they do, because Boston could figure it out. But I think there's something wrong in Boston. I firmly think Boston's going to get kicked out of the play-in. They could prove me wrong, and that'd be great to start playing better basketball. But that game against the Knicks can start igniting better play from them. But based on how they played this season, I don't really see it. I don't see them getting in the playoffs the way that the Pacers just have too much size, and I think just too much talent at this point. And I think that the Wizards are just playing much better basketball, and that's what I think personally. I really think there's something really wrong in Boston. I think they're going to need a major overhaul this summer. And look, I know they don't have Jaylen Brown, but they don't play with a passion. They don't play with any sort of desire. And I think at least the Pacers at least play with some desire. They don't play great defense, but they do play with a passion and desire. The Wizards totally play with a passion and desire and a belief now. So, and the fact is, like, the talent level is equal enough where I can say, okay, the team that plays with better passion, they execute better. I don't think Boston has great execution on the offensive end. I think it's a lot of ISO ball. As soon as Jason Tatum catches the ball, he'll just go ISO all the time. I think that, you need to get other guys involved like they did against the Knicks, but I don't think they run their offense with their stars as good when they're there. And the Pacers, at least, they will run their offense, right? They'll run their offense. Sabonis has no problem passing the ball around and getting guys involved. He has no issue doing that. And look, I think the problem is, Boston doesn't have a consistent big guy that's been healthy that you can go to. Like, Tristan Thompson has not been the offensive force they may need. Robert Williams has been in and out of the lineup and gets in foul trouble too often. Luke Cornett has been a disaster since he's been there, right? Because he can't hit threes. He can't defend anybody. And if you're relying on Luke Cornett, I mean, he's a good player. Like, obviously, look, he's in the NBA. He's incredibly good at basketball. But unfortunately, he's been, when I mean disaster, I'm turning to like how he's fit, right? He hasn't hit threes. He defensively, every big who gets, switched on him just takes advantage of him all the time because he's slow-footed and he's, not always like against like a guy like Embiid or Sabonis. He's not as strong as them, so he gets bullied in the paints. There's something wrong in Boston. I think that it's going to be Wizards and Pacers in the postseason. I really do believe that. Now, if Charlotte beats the Pacers, then the Celtics are getting in because I think the Celtics are much better than the Charlotte Hornets. But if it's the Pacers, I don't know. I think the Pacers are going to get the 8th spot. So it's a hot take, but I think just based on the way that the team's been playing, I believe more in the Pacers at this point in time. In terms of the Western Conference, okay, the Western Conference, we got the Lakers, the 7th seed, and the Warriors at the 8th seed, Grizzlies at 9, and Spurs at 10. Well, I think the Lakers, the way they've been playing recently, and also getting LeBron James back, I think they firmly will be the 7th seed. I do. I think that they're not going to lose to the Warriors, even with how good the Warriors have been playing recently. The Lakers have played really well down the stretch recently, too. They've won the game they're supposed to win. LeBron looks very good, right? He shot 50% his last 2 games, and he scored over 20 points in both, right? So I think that you look at this, and I think the Lakers are going to handle business. Not saying that the Warriors can't beat them, because I think if Steph Curry goes off, there's always a chance. But I think that I don't expect LeBron James and Anthony Davis and Andre Drummond and Dennis Schroeder to lose to the Golden State Warriors, a team that they've handled easily two out of three times this year, and really were blowing out for a while at the first time, and they just lost. But I think the Lakers will get the 7th seed. I don't think the game will be a blow. I think it'll be a pretty close game, but I think the Lakers will get it. Primarily because LeBron James is, being back looking pretty healthy to me. Anthony Davis looking much better recently, except for the game against the Pelicans. He's looking much better. Andre Drummond's been playing much better basketball the last couple games. And, Dennis Schroeder's been having a pretty good season too, and KCP. I mean, I trust them a little bit more. They're more talented than the Warriors overall, right? Because the Warriors don't really have a second star. Well, that's not true. Andrew Wiggins has been really good this year, but it's Anthony Davis and LeBron versus Andrew Wiggins and Steph Curry. It's really, 1 versus 2 stars, right? So, that's the whole angle there. So, with that being said, now the Warriors, who are they going to play? They'll play the Grizzlies again, and I think they're going to beat the Grizzlies because the Warriors, as you saw from yesterday, they run a very good offense. They shoot the 3 much better. Their small ball causes a lot of issues for the Grizzlies. Like, Jonas Valanciunas will dominate them inside, but the Grizzlies are one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the NBA. They don't have a ton of shooters, and it's because John Morant's not really a shooter yet, or a consistent one. Dylan Brooks is like an average shooter. Kyle Anderson's an average shooter, right? Jonas Valanciunas doesn't shoot a ton of threes or shoot any for really that matter. And Jaren Jackson Jr. can hit threes, pretty well, but he has, been injured a lot of the year. So I think the Warriors will get the 8th seed, and the Lakers will get the 7th seed. So the Warriors will play the Jazz, who I think, the Warriors, depending on how they play the Jazz well, and depending on how healthy Donovan Mitchell is, you never know. I think I would take the Jazz in that series, but I could see it going 6 games. I totally could see it going 6 games because Steph Curry could go off and make things very interesting. And I think if the Lakers play the Suns in the first round, I'm going to take the Lakers to beat them in 7. I'm going to take the Lakers to beat the Suns in 7 games, or 6 or 7 games. I think the Suns are good enough and way too good to have that series go to like 5 games, but it's going to be a 6 or 7 game series. But I would take the Lakers in that series for sure. I would, because you have LeBron James healthy and everything like that. So, either of those teams, whoever they play, are going to be dangerous because they're very different styles and they have star talent that is really hard to game plan against and everything like that too. So, it's obviously a very tough environment. But look, the West I think is pretty set in stone. I think that the lower seed teams are going to be really difficult to beat as a top seed, team. Looking at them, like Utah and Phoenix trying to beat the Lakers or the Warriors will not be as easy as the Sixers and the Nets beating the Wizards or the Pacers or the Celtics, right? It's obviously the West is obviously better, but I'm saying that I think the play-in in the East is going to be more interesting because I think that it's very much up for grabs, the 7 and 8 spot, as opposed to the Western Conference, and it'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds, really, in my opinion. It'll be really, really interesting to see how this all unfolds and how it progresses. It will be. It will be very, very interesting. So, I'm looking forward to it because, I'm looking forward to seeing how LeBron plays in these big games, which I think he'll play well. I'm looking forward to seeing if my prediction about the Celtics comes true, and if they actually do step up or if they fold like they have been doing all year. I want to, I like to see, a good couple games, and I think that this is going to be good, but it'll be interesting. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but later on, I'm going to talk about my New York Knicks clinching the 4th spot in the Eastern Conference. And then my last segment, we'll talk about the evolution of the power forward position in the NBA today. So all that coming back up when we come back from this commercial break. See you guys shortly.
Searching your ultimate stop for everything sports. Now listen close and hear this concepts. There's a podcast network that covers from just NFL, MLB, the NBA, the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Michael Schroeder, your host for this podcast today. Thank you so much again for tuning in to this episode today of the Basketball Podcast. Really appreciate it. If you missed my previous segment, I talked about the play-in being set in the NBA. I talked about some interesting predictions I have for the East and West play-in, and what I think about ultimately these teams play a top seed in the playoffs, what will happen. Also, if you missed my first segment about the Hall of Fame, please check that out too, because I want to make sure you're caught up on the show before you listen to this segment. So make sure you listen to those segments as well. Now, I like to do this mostly in every show because I'm a big Knicks fan. I like to give Knicks news. And look, the Knicks now are the officially the fourth seed in the Eastern Conference. I thought this was going to happen. I didn't have any doubt that they were going to be able to get to this point. And they all they had to do was go 500 in that tough West Coast stretch, and they did. Right, and arguably could have went 4-2 and on that stretch if they closed that game against the Lakers better. But with all that being said, they're the fourth seed in the Eastern Conference, right? Which is awesome. It's awesome, right? They survived the Boston role players 96-92. They really just took their foot off the gas in the fourth quarter, did not play very good offense, and didn't execute, and their defensive rotations weren't as good either, but they got the job done. When they had to get points, they did, and it's good for them, obviously. This is a team that was 12th last year in the Eastern Conference. They're fourth this year. No one thought they would get to this point. Tom Thibodeau better be coach of the year, right? I've been harping on this since literally I talked about who the coach of the year should be. And the fact that they played a tougher second half of the schedule than most teams in the league and were able to at least play better basketball shows you that I think, look, are the Knicks a championship level team? No. Are the Knicks even a team that I feel confident can win the first round series? No, not really. When I mean confidently, I'm saying 100% chance they wouldn't come out of the first round. No, I give them about a 65% chance or 60% chance to beat the Hawks. I still think they'll beat them, but it'll be tough. And like I said, they're playing the Atlanta Hawks in the first round, who've been playing really good basketball of late. And they are 3-0 in the season series against the Atlanta Hawks, and Julius Randle has averaged 37.5 points a game against them. But I think the bigger point I want to make for you guys is that no one thought the Knicks would get to this point. No one thought this, right? If you thought this, you were dreaming, that an unrealistic dream at the start of the year, right? Because no one thought they were going to get there. I'm a huge Knicks fan. I was happy if they were in contention to play in. I would have been happy about that. But no, they're fourth in the Eastern Conference. They have played really good basketball all year long without being a very good offensive team, without being a very good team in the clutch, but they are a team that has built themselves very well. And there are doubters, right? Saying Thibodeau's team's too tired. They're going to get run down in the postseason. And look, those are legitimate concerns because that has been the history of Thibodeau teams in the past. But if you think about it, right, R.J. Barrett's played every game this year. Julius Randle plays the most minutes in the league. He's played 71 games this year. And they haven't had a ton of guys miss the lineup. I mean, they have, Derrick Rose has been excellent. And this is really exciting for a Knicks fan to see the Knicks back in the playoffs, a chance to look, Atlanta's been a very, very good team. And it'll be interesting because from my opinion, when I look at the Knicks have a lot of things going for them, right? They're, which I'll get into in a minute. But this is going to be, a good stepping stone in the right direction, right? They're playing against the 8th best offense in the NBA, a team that, doesn't play an incredibly high pace, but a team that can really score in an efficient way, right? And that's not just Nate McMillan creating this great offense. It's also the fact that they did have, Lloyd Pierce was a good offensive coach, right? But Nate McMillan's really turned this team around. They're playing much better defense in Atlanta. They were 23rd at one point, and they're much better now, right? And the point is, when I look at this team, when I look at what they can accomplish, they are a very, very good team, very, very good team. And and it's going to be a really tough out, obviously, for us. Look, they're 22nd defensive efficiency, so they're not great defensively, but they weren't great under Lloyd Pierce. But it's because they are better in terms of field goal percentages and rebounding and everything like that. They're playing more inspired basketball. But with that being said, the matchup's going to be interesting, right? And I think, when I look at the Knicks, I'm going to go through the pros and cons of this basketball team and what, the pros are entering this playoff series. Do I think the layoff will hurt the Knicks in a sense, because the play-in starts this week? So is it going to hurt the Knicks not having this ability to play games and start right now? I'm going to go into all that in just a second, but I think I just want to, end with the fact that, the Hawks are a good team. But as a Knicks fan, I'm happier playing the Hawks than the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat, I don't think we would have any chance of in the first round because of the championship experience of the head coach, the fact that they went to a championship last year, the fact that they play excellent defense, the fact that, Jimmy Butler, I think, is the best shooting guard in the league and one of the best leaders in that right now in the league. So I look at all that and I say, okay, this team is going to be a very, very difficult out. And again, they lost to Milwaukee recently, the Miami Heat, but they didn't have Jimmy Butler. So I'm glad we're not playing Miami in the first round. I'm very glad about that. But with that being said, though, we're going to go into the pros and cons of the New York Knicks as they prepare to face the Atlanta Hawks, right? Atlanta's played incredible basketball, recently, and it's going to be a very tough series. I think it's going 7 games. I'm taking the Knicks in a 7-game series, but I think it's going to go 7 games. I really do. I think that I think Atlanta is good enough. I think that Nate McMillan has enough playoff experience. I think that they're going to get some games because of just how good their offense is. Like I said, they're 8th in offensive efficiency. The Knicks are 22nd, right? But the pros for the Knicks are they have excellent defense, right? The Knicks are 4th in defensive rating, right? They're 4th in defensive rating. And what's cool about that, they're tied for 3rd in defensive rating. So what's great about that is that, they're a consistently great defensive team. They're a team that's going to be able to shut you down in the postseason when the game slows down because they understand rotations. Thibodeau's a great defensive coach. The guys have bought in. Nerlens Noel's an excellent shot blocker. They have Elfrid Payton who can, disrupt guys in the perimeter. Reggie Bullock, same way. And, they buy into defense. They're really good at that. I think the fact is also that, being 3rd in defensive rating, tied for 3rd, it gives you a leg up in the playoffs, right? Because the game slows down, you got to be able to get stops against a team like Atlanta, who's 8th in offense, who has guys like John Collins, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Trae Young, Clint Capella, Kevin Huerter, right? Guys like that who can score, no problem. In different ways, obviously, right? Herter's more of a shooter. Bogdanovic's more of a shooter. John Collins can score in different ways. Trae Young obviously can score in different ways. And Clint Capella is incredibly good on the offensive glass, right? So it's going to be a very good first-round series, right? And it'll be good. The second point about the Knicks, the second pro I look at is the fact that they're really together, right? They share the ball on offense. They communicate really well on defense. They all feed off each other's successes. Everyone understands their role. Everything is kind of in sync, right? Their offense might not be very elite. It isn't. But they at least are together. They do share the ball a lot. Everyone knows where they're supposed to be. And they understand, in order to be good, this is what we have to do to get to that point, right? They understand that being together, communication, trusting one another, being there for one another is a key for them to be able to be a successful team. So I look at that and I'm like, okay, this team has a togetherness about them, right? And being together is something you need in the postseason because things are going to break down. Games are going to either be high pace or ugly. And when I mean ugly, basically how the way the Knicks play, right? Very low scoring, terrible offense, great defense. But if you're not together in order to make those big plays, you're not going to get through it. For example, right? They blew a big lead to the Boston Celtics reserves yesterday. But they stayed together, they stayed poised at the end of the game, and they got the job done anyway. Because they communicated on defense. Offensively, they moved the ball and were being together on that end. And that's important because they're at least developing a identity, which is so important. That's why being together is important, because they have at least an identity of defense and togetherness, right? That's their identity. And that's what has helped this team get to this point of being a really, really good team. Now, Julius Randle's another pro for them, obviously. Julius Randle's been incredibly good this year. Yesterday, not so much. But because yesterday he had a really tough game. But with that being said, he's had an incredible, incredible year. He's averaging 24.1 points a game, 10.2 rebounds, 6 assists on 41% shooting from 3. He's one of the higher guys in the league in win shares. His PER is not incredibly high because he's not really an efficient scorer or shooter. He only shoots 45.6% from the floor, which actually has been the lowest field goal percentage he's had since 2015 through 16. With that being said, though, the guy has definitely made big jumps, right? I mean, the turnovers are very high, but that's because he has the ball in his hands more. He's getting double teamed a lot more and everything like that. But he's had an incredible season. All right, he has. And he's been a really big positive for this team because a lot of people were doubting him because he turned the ball over too much. But with that being said, this is a big opportunity for him. Against Atlanta, he's averaged 37.5 points a game. Yesterday against Boston, he was 5 of 17 from the floor, but he did have 7 rebounds. 7 rebounds and 7 assists. He did have a block. He did go 8 of 10 from the free throw line. He did go 2 of 5 from 3. So the good news is for him, when he struggles, he understands he can still get guys involved. I mean, look at his Clippers game recently, right? The Clippers game, he was 7 of 19, hit big shots down the stretch, and that's important in the playoffs that you at least can trust him a little bit down the stretch when they need him to. And he's been a big plus for them. You can look at Derrick Rose, too. Derrick Rose has been a really big plus for this team as well. Derrick Rose has averaged over 19 points a game in the last 12 or so games he's played. And he had a huge game at the Lakers where he scored 27. He's had multiple games recently of 15-plus points in the last couple games because he had a foot injury that kept him out for a couple games. But what's important about this for the Knicks is that the Knicks have a really reliable guy off the bench in Derrick Rose who's been really, really good. And then R.J. Barrett's emergence, right? R.J. Barrett has been incredibly, incredibly good this year in terms of comparatively to what he was last year. R.J. Barrett has been very good. He's averaging 17.6 points a game, 5.8 rebounds, and 3 assists. He's shooting 48% from 3, 75% from the free throw line, and he doesn't have a very efficient shooting percentage either. But the Knicks are not a very good offensive team. So I hate to say it's not the end of the world. But yesterday against Boston, right? 22 big points, right? And look, he's had bad games. I mean, against Los Angeles Lakers, he was 2 of 14. And he doesn't always shoot a very efficient percentage. But the thing is, he still, can fight his way back. The fact is he stays aggressive, he stays confident in what he has, and he's emerged. I mean, look, he was averaging I think 15 points a game last year, not very efficient from the 3-point line, and he's grown. He's gotten much better in his second year. And if he continues on this trajectory, he can be an all-star, right? But I think his emergence has helped out because, look, the Knicks now have 3 legit guys you can say, okay, this team can be decent on the offensive. They have 3 decent offensive options they can go to, right? Reggie Bullock can hit threes very well. Elfrid Payton gets in the lane and makes things happen. Nerlens Noel's a good shot blocker. Taj Gibson's a good enforcer. Emmanuel Quickley can bring some scoring off the bench as well. So they have some good things about him, right? I think another pro for this team is that they have Tom Thibodeau as head coach, right? Tom Thibodeau's been, I think, the coach of the year. I think he's been the greatest thing the Knicks have been able to do in the recent memory by getting him. Because what he's done is he's brought a sense of toughness to his team, a culture of defense and togetherness. I think that he's also had these guys be held accountable. And being held accountable for a young team gets the best out of them. And I think he understands that his style does work for this team. And it has worked, right? He's been a lifesaver for the Knicks, and really has. And he has playoff experience. Like, he's taken he's been an assistant coach for a bunch of teams too who have had success. And he also took the Chicago Bulls to the Eastern Conference Finals. He's been in multiple second-round series. And the guy at least knows what the playoffs are about. He's been there. And he has guys on the team that have been in the playoffs before, right? You look at guys like Derrick Rose and Taj Gibson. They've been in the playoffs before. Right? They've been in the playoffs before. So he's been a really just great addition to this team. Really has. And he should be the coach of the year. And that's my opinion there. Now the Knicks do have a lot of cons that they need to fix too, in my opinion. Right? They have things that they need to improve in order to be more legitimate as a team going forward. With that being said, right, they do struggle at the end of the games. Look at the Lakers, you look at the Hornets, even look at Boston recently, right? They give up big leads a little too easily, right? They do struggle on the offense down the stretch. And they play the slowest pace in the league, but they do struggle in the clutch. They do struggle at getting buckets when they have to get them, and they really do struggle in that area. With that being said, they're a young team, but they do struggle really heavily on that side. They do struggle closing out games. They had a lead over the Lakers that they really should have closed that game out. They didn't, right? The Lakers ended up beating them, right? Charlotte, they were up by 15 or so and almost lost that game, right? Boston, they were up by 21, almost lost that game, right? So they have a difficulty closing out games because they sometimes have lapses defensively, not often, but it's mostly their offense has a difficulty scoring, which leads me into the second con. They're offensively challenged, right? They're 22nd in offensive efficiency, and the issue with that is that it's going to be hard to get a bucket at the end of the game if Julius Randle's off, right? That is their problem, right? Atlanta's a team that's not offensively challenged. Atlanta's defensively challenged, but they're not offensively challenged. So Atlanta can get a bucket when they need to. Atlanta has guys who can score it, no problem. But the Knicks, if Julius Randle doesn't have it going and Derrick Rose is not scoring 20 points, it's hard for them to get a bucket because RJ Barrett really gets between 15 and like 20 a lot of times, but he's not a lot of times scoring 30 points, even though he has shown he can score like 27 points and stuff like that. Derrick Rose has been more consistent recently in terms of scoring, and they are offensively challenged. Being 22nd in the league, they're a decent 3-point shooting team, but they do struggle scoring a lot of points. I mean, the last couple games, 96 against Boston, who's not a great defensive team. You look at the Spurs, they won that game, but they didn't score a ton of points to get there. Charlotte, they didn't score a ton of points to get there until it got to overtime, right? The Lakers, they scored 99 points. They scored 106 points in a win against the Clippers, right? They win by their defense. Their offense is a problem, right? And that is a concern of mine going into the series against Atlanta, right? It's why I think the series will go 7 games, because the Knicks will struggle odd times offensively. They do it a lot, right? But we'll see. And look, they're also a young team. They have little playoff experience. They only have really 2 guys and the coach who have been in the playoffs before. The rest of these guys, it's their first playoff experience, especially their star player, Julius Randle. He's not been in the postseason before. So that is a problem, too, for this team, is that, who are you going to rely on, and how are they going to, deal with the certain circumstances of being in the postseason, right? It's a different level of intensity. The guys are playing every night. The guys are playing at a hard level every night. The games are more meaningful, obviously, and it's just a different environment, right? It's a much different environment for these teams to cope with and understand, right? And being young is a lot of times that's where, you struggle at the end of the game. You make, turnovers that shouldn't happen. You make defensive lapses. You take bad, ill-advised shots because you're young and inexperienced. So this is going to be a big, thing for Thibodeau, right? And look, I'm not saying if the Knicks lose this playoff series, it's a failure, because the Knicks getting to the playoffs this year has already been a major success. But this is a big thing for Thibodeau, to get these guys to play to what they are good at and not let the moment become too big for them. But ultimately, a lot of times the players got to go out there and produce. And being a young, inexperienced team in the playoffs, that's where you have to rely on your veteran leadership and Taj Gibson and Derrick Rose. But also Julius Randle, that's where he has to slow the game down for himself, right? Understand when he can attack and when he needs not to, right? Nate McMillan's not going to allow him to score 37.5 points a game, right? That's just not going to happen. They're going to double team him a lot. They're going to force other guys to beat him, right? And the Knicks don't have a ton of other offensive options all the time, right? Reggie Bullock has his moments. Derrick Rose has been very consistent, and Barrett's been very good. But outside of those guys, there really isn't a ton of offense coming from anyone else. So they're a young team, right? They're inexperienced in the postseason, but ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that you look at this situation and you're going to say, okay, I look at the Knicks. I think they have a great chance to win this series. I think they're going to win the series in 7 games. That's my prediction, which tells you that it's going to be a really good series, and tells you also that I'm not 100% confident in the pick, because Atlanta's offense is really good. They have more stars and more explosive capabilities on the offensive end. But the Knicks, I think, are more together. I think their defense is much better, and I would take Thibodeau over Nick McMillan as a coach. So I like the Knicks, but I think it's going to, and the Knicks also have their number, right? So I look at the Knicks, and I think the Knicks have a great opportunity to win this series. Great opportunity. But look, they do have their pros and cons, right? They are an excellent defensive team. They are together, and they do have Julius Randle, and they do have guys like Derrick Rose and RJ Barrett. But their cons are they are offensively challenged, and they are young and inexperienced, and they have difficulty closing out games, which is going to be a concern of theirs, right? So it's amazing to see them mix in the playoffs, amazing to see them have home court advantage, and which I think will help them in this postseason. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that this is going to be a tough series for them, and they got to be able to get the job done anyways. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, we're going to talk about the evolution of the power forward position. Why I think it's gotten a little bit weaker in today's NBA, but why I also think there are some great benefits that both eras have shown us in a sense of what a power forward can be. So all that shortly, I will break that all down for you guys. See you guys soon.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Michael Schroeder, your host for this podcast today. Thank you again for tuning in. I have really appreciated you guys tuning in today, and it's been great to share some basketball insight with you guys so far. If you missed my previous segment, I talked about the New York Knicks, as I've talked about in most segments. I always talk about the New York Knicks, it feels like. But I talked about them clinching fourth in the Eastern Conference, right? They're playing Atlanta. The Atlanta Hawks in the first round, and I talked about how they've gotten to this level of success. I talked about their pros and cons entering this series, and why I ultimately think they're going to win in 7 games against Atlanta. And that's where I went with that segment. If you missed my other segments, I talked about the Hall of Fame in my first segment, the speeches, the guys who got in and women who got in, and I also talked about the play-in situation within the Eastern and Western Conference. It got set. I'm going to talk about the predictions and all that kind of stuff. So if you missed those segments, please go check those out. They're definitely worth your time. Now, on to the last segment. We're going to talk about the evolution of the power forward position, which is pretty interesting, right? And I've, as you guys have heard me on the previous segments, I talked about different positions in the NBA, right? I've given my top 5 at each position the last couple weeks, but now I'm going to talk about kind of the evolution of it, because you think about the power forward position, you don't really think about a ton of guys there. Comparatively, when you thought in like the early 2000s to about 2014-ish, there were tons of guys you thought of, right? Just to name a few guys for you guys, like Kevin Garnett, right, who recently just got into the Hall of Fame, right? Like just what his impact was. You look at Dirk Nowitzki, right? Chris Webber, Rasheed Wallace, Tim Duncan, Amari Stoudemire, Pau Gasol, Kevin Love when he was with Minnesota, Blake Griffin with the Clippers, right? Zach Randolph. Guys like that. I mean, think about all the battles you have, right, with those guys, right? You're going to put like Mehmet Okur in there or Carlos Boozer, right? I mean, there were a lot of good power forwards back in the day that were in really tough matchups. And I think the power forward position back in the day was like a top 2 position at that period of time. It really was. I mean, it was really hard to game plan for those kind of guys because they were they dominated the league. I'm talking about from like 2005 to about 2014. These guys just dominated the league, and they did it their way. But then today you only have really a few good ones, right? You have Giannis, you have Anthony Davis, Zion Williamson, Julius Randle, right, this season, Bam Adebayo, and then like Domantas Sabonis, right? You could say Draymond Green too, but Draymond Green's a little different, right? I consider more, Draymond Green's a power forward, I guess, but he's not an elite level offensive scorer. He does things on the other end. That's he's kind of a utility guy, right? But you group him in there. But the other, again, you look at the matchups, right? In the Eastern Conference, right? It's like the only good power forwards you'll really see are like Bam Adebayo versus Giannis or Julius Randle versus Giannis or something like that. But it's not the same, right? It's not the same. And what I want to break down the segment is I named all those guys for you. It's like how the power forward position still isn't like bad today, but it's definitely I think the weakest position right now in the NBA because the guards have really evolved based on how the way the game's changed. The centers have become more of what power forwards were back in the early 2000s, and the power forwards have kind of become that middleman in a sense, right? And what I mean by that is that like they've kind of become like either they're a 3-point shooting guy or they're a small forward who plays power forward because they have the size. Because teams like to go smaller now, right? So a lot of these guys are playing like the center position sometimes because of like the small nature of the way the NBA wants to go and the way the games went, right? So, there is a difference in the way that these teams have been able to get to this point. There is a major difference, obviously, and I don't really like the way the power forwards are today, and I'll be the first one to say it. I think Giannis is great. I think that Anthony Davis is really good, obviously. Zion Williamson, the guys I named. Julius Randle, Bam Adebayo, Domantas Sabonis, Draymond Green. Those guys are great players. They do things differently for their team, right? Which is something I'll talk about the benefits in just a minute. But you look at the early 2000s, right? You have Kevin Garnett, Hall of Famer. Dirk Nowitzki, Hall of Famer. Chris Webber will be in the Hall of Fame. Rasheed Wallace, multiple-time All-Star. Tim Duncan, Hall of Famer. Amari Stoudemire, multiple-time All-Star. Pau Gasol will be a Hall of Famer. Kevin Love, multiple-time All-Star back then. Blake Griffin, multiple-time All-Star. Zach Randolph, multiple-time All-Star, right? You look at the guys now, right? Giannis has been an MVP. Anthony Davis has been a multiple-time All-Star and a champion. Zion Williamson, multiple-time All-Star, right? Julius Randle, one-time All-Star. But the impact of winning is just different with these guys, right? Zion Williamson has not made the playoffs. Domantas Sabonis has been in the All-Star team the last 2 years, but he, made the playoffs the previous year, but he's in danger of not making the playoffs this season, right? Bam Adebayo has been on a team that's very good, but he's not the main guy on that team, right? Julius Randle has led the Knicks to a great season this year, but this has been his first real exceptional year right now in the NBA. And, I look at this position. The centers, for example, you can name them down the list. You got Joel Embiid, you got Nikola Jokic, you got Rudy Gobert, Nikola Vucevic, Sabonis is kind of a mixture of both, right? He's a power forward center. So, that you got that. And then you also have, the idea in the Western Conference, you got DeAndre Ayton, you got Yusuf Nurkic, you got Vita Zubats, you got, there's guys I'm missing off the top of my head, obviously, but the center position's really becoming a big position again, right? Those guys are some of the top players in the game, and Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic, obviously, right? You think about it, like Marc Gasol, right? Really good center for a while, right? You look at other teams across the league. Clint Capella's a good center, right? You look at Christian Wood, very good center. You look at with the Lakers too. Andre Drummond, obviously, right? You look at when LaMarcus Aldridge was healthy, he was a great power forward. I forgot him, right? Put LaMarcus Aldridge in that list too, right? I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer, right? But he's a multiple-time All-Star, right? So here's the benefits of today's power forward is that they're more positionless, right? So they're not cemented in kind of one spot, right? They can do different things. They can pass, dribble, shoot. They're all different kind of players, right? They all have different skill sets. They're not all kind of similar players, right? You look at the ones back in the day, they were really good shooters and post guys, right? They were kind of cemented in one position. Dirk was kind of an anomaly because he could take guys off the dribble and stuff like that. But Blake Griffin could do a little bit of that too. But they were all kind of cemented as post up guys, weren't really positionless, couldn't play them in multiple positions. And that's kind of the way, you look at Blake Griffin right now, he's more of a small ball 5 now. And that's primarily because, he's kind of cemented in that position. That's what the power forward was back in the day, right? When I mean back in the day, 10 years ago. And, the power forwards today, I think, are the weakest position because you have guys Giannis has been very good, but Giannis plays one style, right? Drive to the rim and try to dunk on you. Anthony Davis is very finessey, right? Zion Williamson's all power, right? Julius Randle is kind of a mixture of all three levels, which he's really good at, but he's kind of more traditional to a lot of other power forwards that we have seen before, but still. Bam Adebayo is kind of more of a point forward that lives off pick and rolls and taking bigs off the dribble. Domantas Sabonis is kind of more of a post guy. So it's very different. They're very different because the league is very positionless now. which is a benefit of being a power forward today because you can be positionless. But also the fact is you don't really know what a power forward today is because Marcus Morris plays power forward for the Clippers, and he's not a power forward. He's a small forward, right? But in today's game, he can play the 4, right? You have Bruce Brown who sometimes plays a power forward for the Brooklyn Nets. You look at the fact that like Tobias Harris plays like a lot of times the power forward position for the 76ers because he's he can guard that position, right? It's because the league is not as honed on guys dominating inside anymore, and I understand that, right? More spacing allows for higher offensive efficiency, but you start the fact that like the power forward used to be one of the strongest back then, right? Because you had matchup after matchup where you had to bring your lunch in order to guard the guy that was going next to you, right? You guys remember the Kevin Love versus Blake Griffin battles. You remember the Tim Duncan versus Dirk battles. You remember the Amari Stoudemire versus Spurs battles, or Pau Gasol versus Dirk and those guys, right? Or Rasheed Wallace versus guys in the Eastern Conference like Kevin Garnett and stuff like that, right? You remember these matchups, or LaMarcus Aldridge, right? When he torched the Houston Rockets. I mean, these guys were unbelievable. They were like, in my opinion, outside of maybe like the shooting guard position or small forward. I mean, they could arguably have been the strongest position in the NBA back in that 2005 to 2013-14 age. And they were, the power forwards back then were so highly touted because of what they could do. And it's a very different era today. So the points I'm going to make here, the difference is the fact is, I've kind of touched on it a bunch, is that, one, I think the power forward is the weakest position in the NBA today, because I think that there isn't a lot of great matchups. I think that there isn't a huge defining trait of being a power forward in today's NBA, to be honest with you. I think that the fact is, too, is that a lot of them also are not really post guys. I think that a lot of them are just like drive to the rim or guys who just shoot threes. Or jump shots. I mean, Anthony Davis kind of can do it all, but he's not really a strong post guy. He posts up, but he faces up a lot and shoots a lot of step backs. Giannis doesn't really post up with the whole ton. He doesn't really have a great post game. Zion Williamson, when he posts up, it's just basically just to drive on a guy. Sabonis, kind of similar situation. Bam Adebayo, kind of not really, like, there's not a lot of post skill that a lot of those power forwards back in the day had. Well, not even like, when I mean back in the day, like, I don't mean 1990s, I mean like 10 years ago. Right, like Kevin Garnett had a post game. Tim Duncan had one of the most elite post games we've ever seen. LaMarcus Aldridge had a post game. Dirk had a post game. Rasheed Wallace had a post game. Chris Webber had a post game. Amari Stoudemire had a post game. Pau Gasol had a post game. Kevin Love had a post game. Right, Blake Griffin even had a post game. And look, it's the idea of the generations building off of things they saw from past players, and the fact that you have to be able to do more as a big. But like again, you don't really know what a power forward is today. Right? You don't, because it's a very different era. It's very positionless basketball. And that's what makes things very difficult for the entire stretch, because you look at the fact that the game's very positionless and you don't really know what power forwards are. It has kind of made power forwards kind of get pushed out the window, because you definitely know what a center is. You definitely know what a small forward, shooting guard, and point guard is. You don't really know what a power forward is, because you can kind of slide guys at that 4 spot. It's more about like how well defensively can you match up with those teams, right? And that's kind of where it goes, right? Like, centers today play more, like a lot of these centers play more like the power forwards of the past, age. Like, you look at Sabonis, right? He's kind of a power forward center. You look at like Nikola Vucevic, he plays like that a little bit. You look at Jokic and guys like that, like they play in the post and they play on the perimeter a little bit, right? And Jokic and Embiid are definitely centers, right? But you look at the other guys, and it's a mixture, right? It's a very different situation, obviously. And like I said, teams enjoy small ball, right? And the reason why small ball is great is because the teams want to shoot a lot of threes and space the court, right? So you have a power forward playing center now. It opens up the court more because it's more mismatches. Defensively, teams are able to rotate better because you don't have to hedge and recover on pick and rolls anymore. All you have to do is drop coverage or switch. And a lot of teams like to switch now because it's just easier defensively to guard that. it's an interesting situation, right? I'm not a big fan of the whole thing, but I understand that's the way the game is. But I think that it's hurt the power forward position because there's no, you don't really define them that much. I mean, like, Giannis is a power forward because of his skill set in a sense, because he's not overly incredibly skilled. He's, in terms of ball handling, he's excellent. In terms of like getting to the rim, he's very good. But like having all the skills necessary, right? He's not a great shooter, and his footwork's not always fantastic down in the post, right? He's got good footwork, weaving in and out of traffic on the perimeter, but and then you look at Anthony Davis, right? Anthony Davis is not the most physical guy, right? He's very finesse. He's got a lot of great skill sets, but Anthony Davis is a guy who likes to shoot a lot of mid-range jumpers. He's a guy who likes to face you up and shoot it. He likes a guy to get like easy lob plays and that kind of stuff, right? You look at Zion Williamson. He's very skilled in terms of ball handling and finishing around the rim, but all he really wants to do is finish around the rim, right? Julius Randle, is a guy who, has a decent post game. He's he likes to take the exit of the dribble. He likes to shoot a lot of threes, play physical, right? But he isn't the most efficient scorer, right? Bam Adebayo is a guy who has a good 15-foot jump shooter and he can take bigs off the dribble. He doesn't have an elite level post game. He's an elite level defender though, and that's the difference, right? You have to have guys who can defend all 5 positions. Now, back then you didn't really have to have that, right? So that's another difference. And then you look at a guy like Sabonis, right? Sabonis is not a great defender, but he's a guy that can play through dribble handoffs. He can play from shoot the 3-pointer. He can, take slower-footed bigs off the dribble. He's a great rebounder. It's a very different situation, obviously. Very, very different situation today now as opposed to back then. The way that the game's played, the way that the game is at least marketed is a sense of like, we're going to shoot a lot of threes, and we're going to play positionless basketball because it's easier for teams to game plan if we have set positions, right? And Giannis, for example, is the way that he would fit in that other era would be different, right? Because he would just try to drive by all the bigs that he's playing against, and a lot of the guys that are guarding him are smaller base guys. Or actually, a lot of teams now put their centers on him because he's not going to shoot threes. Zion Williamson, similar situation, right? Like they'll put like Brook Lopez on Zion Williamson when the Bucks play them, and then they'll put when Giannis plays, the Sixers, like Joel Embiid will guard Giannis a lot of times because Giannis is a guy that likes to take bigs off the dribble and everything like that. So it's interesting. If you look at the evolution, right? The evolution has become the fact that the power forwards are not really post guys anymore. Like, even in that era, right, they were expanding more of their shooting and handle stuff, but they did have a post game they rely upon. A lot of these guys don't really have that in their game. When I mean post ups, I mean like back to the basket. A lot of these guys have post ups in the terms of like they post you up and face you up, right? But that's because the game's more positionless now. That's more accepted. It's very different. It's a very different kind of style and a very different way of attacking defenses because the game is a lot of threes, a lot of open space. I mean, think about it. Anthony Davis needs a lot of open space to attack, right? And that's because he needs to have positionless-based guys that can spread the court. That's why LeBron James loves to have shooters on the team because he likes to have guys that can just space the court because he needs the opportunity to drive the lane. That's why Brooklyn loves to go small because they're like, no team can defend us because we have 3 elite level scorers and just shooters around it, so you have to help on us. We could get out to a shooter, he makes it, right? That's why Blake Griffin's kind of been relegated to a 3-point shooter. And Kevin Love was relegated to a 3-point shooter when he went to Cleveland, was because of that whole idea of positionless basketball, which I don't think is great because I think you lose the fact of like if you have a big power forward, you lose that size advantage that you ultimately have. But the way the NBA is played, it doesn't really matter that much if you think about it because the teams are like, we're just going to figure it out because we like to go small and just shoot a lot of threes. I think it's kind of hurt the game because I think the power forward position used to be something that everyone would look forward to watching because it was a really physical, fun matchup. Guys who could take bigs off the dribble and post up, and it was rivalries between guys like Dirk and Duncan or Garnett and Rasheed Wallace or Blake Griffin and Kevin Love, where you had Stoudemire in there with the Phoenix Suns, and they all played very physical and like wanted to attack the rim, and you don't have as many of great power forwards in today's game because of the way it's positionless and the way the game's kind of expanded. And I think it's hurt it. I think it's hurt the game. I think it's not really provided for always the best basketball. But That being said, there are guys who do disagree with that because they would say, like, well, it's positionless now. It's more space to operate, and you don't have to be set stone in one position, right? You can be kind of fluid in the way that you can move in and out of positions. That's a fair argument, but I think the problem with that argument, too, is that we're not having a fluidity. You're having too much fluidity in positions. You don't really, like, if you're a guy that's growing up, like, you don't, it's great to be able to play all the positions in the world, but again, when you get to a team, you got to be able to play a certain position. And I think also there's not set rivalries always right there, right? It's like, oh, Giannis and Embiid, okay, but like they're different positions, right? You look at, LeBron and Kawhi, they're similar positions, right? LeBron and Kevin Durant, similar positions, right? I think the rivalry is always better when you have a guy you're going at. I mean, look at like Shaq and Hakeem Olajuwon back in the day, or you look at like Patrick Ewing and Hakeem Olajuwon, or you look at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Robert Parrish, right? Like, guys that same position that dominated the game and had rivalries because they were so good against each other and so wanted to beat each other. That's ultimately, at the end of the day, the difference, right, between this. And I think power forward position, it has gotten great in terms of like being able to expand your game, but I think the con is you don't really have a set power forward position where you can build that great power forward that I think has been lost. I think shooting threes is great, but I think you want to have a big that can be able to do that. That's a power forward, right? Guy that can handle the ball a little bit and stuff like that. Now, like, that's center positions now. It's very different, and that's why like you see a lot of regression in terms of the great power forwards we have in today's game, and that's kind of where I go with that. So ultimately, the power forward position today I think has gotten worse. Thank you for tuning into the show today. Remember to like and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Make sure to give us a 5-star review on any podcast platform that you listen to. We would greatly appreciate that. And then also hit the subscribe button on those podcast platforms so you can get more episodes from our podcast today to become available. I'm Michael Schroeder. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I will see you guys soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.